Is there any hope? Well, there's some people think maybe not. We have the red scarf that we use to remind you and to remind ourselves that every 30 seconds, somebody is put into human trafficking and dies as a result of being put into human trafficking. Every 30 seconds. And we have a whole host of other issues like that in this world of ours that need our attention, our prayers. And for many of those people, even in colonias here, they begin to think maybe there is no hope. But there is. There's always hope. Some of you have heard me talk about my favorite newscaster of all time. During World War II, Gabriel Heater. He started out his radio broadcast. For those younger people in the audience, this was in the days before television. He said, "Ah, yes, there's good news tonight." And even after the war was over and we were dealing with the aftermath of the war, and he continued on television, he always started his newscast. "Ah, yes, there's good news tonight." Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could turn on one of our TV news stations and have one of the news analysts say, "Oh, yes, there's good news tonight," instead of all the stuff that we're bombarded with. Because indeed, yes, there is good news. And there's good news here this morning. And I thought this morning that a perfect opening to the service was for us to sing the song, them bones, them dry bones." And I was almost tempted to ask Nedra Knurk to get some people to come up here and do a modern dance. She did that years ago, and it didn't go so very well. And I had a hunch it wouldn't go too well here this morning either. But I thought about it, because I thought we ought to celebrate the idea that this passage tells us there is good news. There is hope. There are some things in this passage of Ezekiel, I think, that want to make our heart dance, and the feeling of joy as we read about these dry bones. The nation of Israel, the holy city of Jerusalem, and the magnificent temple, all laid in ruins. But the prophet Ezekiel had a vision. He sat there in the middle of the valley, surrounded by nothing but dry bones and skeletons. Bones were everywhere. And it was a scene of total desolation and total despair. A valley with nothing but dry bones. Have you ever been in a personal valley of dry bones? Some of you probably have. Maybe a bad marriage. Started out good and then it kind of turned sour. One day, maybe you just wake up and all around you there's nothing but dry bones of a loving relationship that had once been. Some people in their work get surrounded by nothing but dry bones. Or maybe some people within their health conditions, are surrounded by a valley of dry bones. Maybe relationships that you have, or even the relationships as you raise your children, seem like nothing but a valley of dry bones. Maybe a dream of a lifetime perhaps, has died and left you with nothing but dry bones. For many people, it can happen with age. And you know, the people who write about aging are right. Aging is not for sissies. Strength falters as we get older, and we spend an inordinate amount of time waiting in doctor's office, waiting. Dry bones. Maybe we're caring for an aging parent or an aging loved one, and we tell ourselves, and maybe others, well, we don't really mind. After all, we do love them. But the stress doesn't let up. And that stress can be affecting us as caregivers as well. Dry bones. Ezekiel looked around the valley at all of those dry bones, and he understood that those bones represented all of his people of Israel, and they were scattered bones, and they were people who died without any hope. And he knew that only a miracle could bring together his people again and could restore them with the vitality and purpose they had once had as the country of Israel. Only a miracle would let those people live again. And as Ezekiel gazed upon those dry bones scattered on the floor of the valley, he heard the voice of the Lord. And the Lord was asking him, "Son of man, can these bones live again?" Now there's a question really worth asking. Can these bones live again? In other words, is there any hope? Is there any hope for that nation? Hope for that relationship? Hope for your family? Hope for your future? Is there any hope? Ezekiel answered, "Sovereign Lord, you alone are the one who knows." And that's true. Only God knows. Ultimately, God has the answer for all of our issues and for all of our pain. Then God said to Ezekiel, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, 'Dry bones, hear the words of the Lord.'" I love that sentence. The word of the Lord. That's a powerful word and a phrase, the word of the Lord. And in the passage it also says, "Let there be light." And there was light. You see, the word of the Lord is life-giving. And God says to Ezekiel, this is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones, I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to all the bones, and I will make flesh come upon you, and I will cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So Ezekiel prophesied as he was commanded, and as he was prophesying, there was a noise rattling all around, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And the toe bone connected to the foot bone connected to the leg bone connected to the knee bone connected to the thigh bone connected to the backbone connected to the neck bone, and the neck bone connected to the head bone. Oh, hear the name of the Lord. Ezekiel looked, and suddenly tendons appeared on all of those bones, and skin began to cover them. It was a miracle. It was the miracle that he knew had to happen. But there was no breath in them. Then the voice of God said to him, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breath, from the four winds, and breathe in to these skins, that they may live. So Ezekiel prophesied as he had been commanded, and breath entered into those newly formed bodies, and they came to life, and they stood up on their feet in a vast army. Can you see that in your imagination? Bones all coming together and forming a large army. Well, for a generation which is fascinated by zombies and cyborgs, this picture from the scriptures shouldn't be too far out. It ought to be kind of exciting. Then God said to Ezekiel, Son of man, these bones are people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore, prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I'm going to open up your graves, and I'm going to bring you from them. I will bring you back into the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle in your land. Then you will know what I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. Well, this passage really means that we should never, ever call any situation hopeless. Hopeless as long as we are followers of Jesus Christ. This is a world that we live in God's kingdom, here and now, when we are never, ever beyond hope. Those dry bones can yet come together. Those dry bones can again live once more. You see, God is the God of new life. And that's what that dry bones passage means. He has created new life. And that's the good news for today. God is the God of new life. There are many examples of new beginnings and fresh starts throughout the entire Bible. We can look as Abraham called out from his homeland to a land that was unknown. And God promised him that he would be the father of a great nation. Yet he got to be 90, and he and his wife Sarah were still without children. They laughed at the idea that God would fulfill yet his promise. But they were wrong. Sarah bore a son, and she named that son Isaac, which incidentally means laughter. There was Joseph, the boy with the coat of many colors. He was despised by his brothers. He was put in a pit, and he was sold into slavery in Egypt. And there in Egypt, Potiphar's wife accused him falsely, and he was thrown in prison. But God intervened in his life. In a very relatively brief time, he became the number 2 man in all of Egypt. Then came Moses. He was raised in the Pharaoh's court, but he has to flee after he took a man's life, and he was banished into wilderness. And there he watched his father-in-law's sheep. And God comes to him, and he became the vehicle by which his people escaped slavery. And he becomes the one by whom God's law is transmitted to humanity. Never say that any person or any situation is hopeless. Then there was David, a man after God's own heart. But he gave in to lust and adultery and deceit, and ultimately even murder. He paid a terrible price. His family paid a terrible price. But God never gave up on David. We read his Psalms, and we know that he discovered God's gift of grace in life. And from his lineage came the Messiah. Well, in the New Testament, we encounter Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who was despised by all people. He was probably a cheat and a stealer, traitor. But after a meal with the Master, Zacchaeus became a new person. Or how about Peter? Peter was impetuous, ineffective, indecisive, quick to anger. He was the disciple who denied the Master, and yet he became the leader of the early church. And even more grandly, there is the Apostle Paul, who preceded early Christians. But he had a vision. He had a vision of the risen Christ, and he was transformed to become the greatest missionary who ever lived. You think your life is hopeless? You think a situation in your life is hopeless? That your future is hopeless? And you look at the bones of your life, your marriage, your future, and you despair that anything good can ever happen to you again. Well, hear the word of the Lord. Them bones, them dry bones. Them bones, dry bones. They're gonna rise again. Mary Magdalene was a woman tormented by evil spirits. But there was a man from Nazareth, and his name was Jesus. And he touched their life, and Mary was given a new life. And she was the first of his followers to whom he appeared on the resurrection morning. Our God is a God of new life. And God is still doing miracles in people's lives today. You see, there would be reason to despair if we were just simply discussing ancient history that I just did. But Christ is still touching people's lives today. And Ezekiel heard the voice of the Lord asking him, Son of man, can these bones live? And Ezekiel answered, Sovereign Lord, you only know. Maybe you're asking the question about your life or someone that you love. Well, hear the word of the Lord. Them bones, them dry bones, going to rise again. Amen.